Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Today on the big program, lots to get to, lots to talk about. Job numbers. Job numbers out. Another good job numbers. No matter what the Fed is trying to do, no matter what Republicans are working on doing, job numbers still really good. 253,000 new jobs created in the month of April, beating expectations. Once again, 11,000 of those manufacturing jobs, bringing back those. It's one of these things where you go, I know the doomsdayers and the anti-Biden folks. They're all, it's bad, it's bad. This is another month of beating expectations. 12.7 million jobs created during Biden's term thus far. Unemployment down to 3.4%, lowest since the late 60s. Black unemployment, historic low at 4.7%. Hispanic unemployment, historic low, 4.4%. Now imagine, and I was thinking about this today, imagine had this been what Trump was able to accomplish. Can you imagine the right-wing spin machine and just effusive with praise on how Donald Trump did this all by himself, did it all alone? Donald did it all. You've got more people now participating in the labor force than we had before 2008. Inflation's coming down, wages are higher, all this stuff is going on, and yet you talk to the average person because of what's being projected by our corporate-controlled mainstream media, and what you've got. Well, what you've got is, people who are going, oh, the economy's bad, things are bad, we're in the wrong direction. I say we're going in the right direction. We're investing in infrastructure, we're reshoring manufacturing, something that I've been screaming for a couple of decades now. We're finally doing some of this. Understand, you can't just flip on the switch and everything goes well. Biden, like Obama, like Clinton before, like Carter even, inherited a mess, inherited an economy in crisis. And again, these are, we go through this. We go through a couple of years of a Republican presidency where they destroy everything, and jobs are going down, and the economy's, people are losing their homes and losing their jobs, and things are not good. And then Democrats come in and start moving in a better direction, and all the while Republicans go, see how bad things are? They did this. Because they think we're stupid and we're not going to remember that, wait a second, this happened because of horrible conservative supply side voodoo Reaganomic and bad fetish policy. I saw an interesting graph today that said under Democratic presidents, the average job growth per month was over 175,000 jobs per month, every month that a Democrat was in the Oval Office, going back to 1939. 175,000 new jobs every month. And you go, well, the Republicans must have done much better than that. No. In fact, 67, it's almost three times the number. 67,000 is what Republicans created during, and again, understand, we're talking the FDR years, we're talking Truman, we're talking Kennedy, LBJ, Carter, Clinton, Obama, and now Biden, versus the record of Eisenhower, Nixon, Reagan, Bush, and Trump. And the numbers don't lie. It's like the old Harry Truman quote. If you want to live like a Republican, vote for a Democrat. Because your life is going to get better. And that's true. The economic policies of investing in stuff and getting people to work and giving people the ability to earn a decent wage and get ahead, those are democratic principles. Squeezing the quarter till the eagle screams before you take it out of a working person's pocket is not a good policy, and it's what Republicans have done. And for me, it comes back to, how do we make it possible for families to move forward? How do we make it possible for workers to do better? And I had an interesting conversation today. It was one of these things where I've had this conversation, got to be 1,000 times now, and it goes like this. And understand, no generation is unique. Every generation throughout the history of humanity, I am certain, has done this, has looked behind them and goes, those kids, they got it easy. When I was a kid, things were much harder. And it's true. It's back, back when the wheels were square on the buggy, it was probably harder to push that buggy. When they figured out how to make round wheels, got a lot easier. When they figured out a horse could pull it, got even easier than that. When they figured out a steam engine could pull it, so much easier. So every generation looks back and goes, things, I had to work harder than you. And this was one of those. And I know none of us like to have this, but this was one of those conversations of how young people are lazy, no one wants to work. And I'm like, again, do we have to do this? And the answer was yes. We most certainly had to do this. And, as you get this knee-jerk commentary that a segment of our population seems fixated on, my mind went to this place of going, I'm tired of this already. This propping ourselves up because we think we're superior to anyone else. But then I started thinking about it. I mean, we're fixated on the hot takes as opposed to a thoughtful conversation. And right now, this guy's hot take was, they're lazy. I'm the hero in my movie, so to speak. I'm the hero in my show. I pulled myself up by the bootstraps. I paid my dues. And it got me thinking. It got me thinking too, if I were a young person today, would I have done the same things that I've done throughout my working life? You can ask my wife, the 26 odd years we've been together, I've never not worked less than 70 hours. I've always been a chronic workaholic. It's one of those things, growing up poor, it's one of those things where you go, my kids are not going to suffer the way I did. And I think every generation thinks that way as well. But here's the thing. And this is where my mind is in this weird spot. I grew up believing that if you worked hard, you played by the rules, you'd get ahead. This idea that, if you paid your dues. And look, I think Generation X, which I am a part of, and I think we believe this, the boomers, I think, believed it as well, that if you work hard, you played by the rules, you put your time in, paid your dues, you'd make it, you'd get ahead, you'd do better, you'd have opportunity down the road, and it was going to be okay. I don't know that the coming generation, I don't know that they believe that the way we do. They don't believe there is a future for them that is as prosperous as it was for the past. They don't believe, in talking with them, they don't believe that the institutions that we relied on are going to survive to help them thrive. And who can blame them? Their entire lives they were told, you're going to see a UFO before you see a Social Security check. And then you see Republicans doing everything they can do to make that a reality. So am I surprised that when they go, well, you don't have to work for somebody because there's no real reason for that? I go, I kind of get it. Coming out of the pandemic, when we were told you're essential and you're frontline heroes, and we slapped them on the back, or virtually, of course, and gave them all of this praise and titles and put them up on a pedestal, only to say, sorry, but that's not going to come with any raise or any additional income. It's just, we want you to know that we're happy that you're risking your life for the rest of us. And it got me to thinking that the middle class, which was we're trained as a population, we're all going to be in the middle class, so all of us. What it takes to get into the middle class simply is to be in the middle of the income. And that middle income was sufficient to do a number of things, to buy a home, to save for the future, to have a lot of the nice things that you expect, vacations and cars and all of this stuff, security, a little financial security. That's what part of the middle class is. And as you go back and you look at the numbers, and I'm a numbers kind of guy. For instance, in 2010, in order to be in that middle class, the median income, the average income that they threw out, the average income they threw out was about 74 grand a year in 2010 to be considered middle class. Today it's about 90,000. It's gone up. And how many people make $90,000 a year? And if you take inflation into account, that 74 grand from 2010 is actually like 101,000 today. So there's an $11,000 pay gap there between the standard of living you had in 2010 as opposed to what you have today. And the fact of the matter is, and we see it through bad tax policy, we see it in how much people have had to pay for health care and all kinds of things, that the percentage of wealth that's going to that American middle class has diminished. And it's one of those things where you go, by how much? Well, consider in 1970, that middle class, that 50% of the population that's in the middle, it's not the 25% at the bottom or the 25% at the top, it's that middle, it's those middle two quintile groups, the middle class. Those two, that middle part took 62% of the income. They were doing okay. They were making a little bit of money. As of 2014, that number had fallen to 43%, and I would argue it's under 40% now. So we're losing a ton of income. And you go, well, where did it go? Well, we know where it's gone. It's gone to the very top, to the 1%, and really the 1% of the 1%. We came out of the pandemic. How much money went to our billionaire class? A couple of $1 trillion? How many people at the bottom of the economy got worse off? I mean, this is the part that gets me. And I go back to, I understand why people don't want to work hard like my generation had to, because the reward's not there. You look at what people look down on. I get this all the time. You go to dinner parties. So what do you do for a living? I'm a truck driver. Oh, I make a good living as a truck driver. I'm very happy with that. I've been a union truck driver my whole life. I've done very well. I've got a pension. I've got all kinds of, I'm going to be okay. Thanks very much. Thanks for looking down on us. But you go through mechanics, electricians, pipe fitters, plumbers, all jobs that people look down the tip of their nose at. But you got people who are going, well, what do you ask a kid today what they want to be? They want to be a social media influencer, athlete, actor, whatever. They want to be at the top of it because there's where the reward is. It's where the money is. It's where the appreciation is. And what we have is a system that's set up that if you work a job, like literally work for a living, you're somehow looked down on. Now, I hope that's changing. But it still doesn't mean that we're going to distribute wealth the way we used to. And for a working class family to exist in this day and age, you have to have two incomes, a minimum of two incomes. And I've argued here recently that it's going to be more than two incomes. You're going to need three at some point. So that means you're going to need to send the kids into the workforce. Get the kids out there working, bring a third income into the house. Then you can be middle class again. And it just popped into my head. I remember this woman. We were having a conversation about what middle class was, and this is going back probably 15 years. And this will never leave me. She said that she believed that she was middle class. And I said, well, how much do you make a year? Because middle class is usually an income kind of thing. And she said at the time, like 15 grand a year, which puts you nowhere near the middle class, even 15 years ago. And I explained that to her. I go, you do realize that that's not enough to be into the middle class. She goes, no, I'm in the middle class because I don't take anything from government. That was her definition, that she didn't need food stamps. She didn't need LIHEAP or any of the programs to help her, that she was able to make it on her own, which made her middle class. And I kind of broke her heart. I go, do you get money back at the end of the year from paying your taxes? She goes, yeah, I get a pretty good chunk back. I go, How much do you get? And she's like $3,000 or $4,000. And I said, well, that is getting something from the government because you didn't pay that much in, but you got more out. That's help. That's a good thing. I'm all in favor of it, but it kind of blows your idea out of the water. And she was very angry at me, but down the road came back and said, you're probably right. So we have this idea that we're all part of the middle class, that we're part of this, and I want everyone to at least be there. I want people to be better. But the fact of the matter is it's much harder. It's much harder to make ends meet today. Now, what I found interesting is, as I was talking to my friend who was ranting and raving about how lazy Gen Z is, I said, I don't know that I would do the kind of things that I did because I don't know the reward is there. The wages certainly aren't. The benefits aren't. And quite frankly, the loyalty isn't. I still held on to the idea that you could work, 40 years for a company, get a gold watch and a pension, and you would be okay. This generation understands that's not going to happen. They know that their future is tenuous at best, and whatever skills they have today, they're going to have to change, repeatedly over the decades. And there's part of me that goes, I get it. Now, my friend, with the frame of they're all lazy, didn't know how to answer when I said, hey, you do realize Gen Z, if I need to defend them from you, they actually have a home ownership rate much higher than Gen X did and higher than the millennials did. And, he didn't believe me, and I had to send him the documentation later. But yeah, surprisingly, and close to what the baby boomers were able to accomplish at this point in their lives. So there are people in Gen Z, regardless of what the mainstream message is, that they're all lazy, that are actually, moving on with their lives and doing okay. And that's a good thing. I'm hoping the narrative spins around. But again, I come back to this, it's the jobs. When do we demand better wages, hours, conditions? What's interesting? Somebody threw another statistic at me that said in the 1980s, the average average home was 4 to 5 times the median income. Today, that number's 7.5, almost 8 times. And you think about what it takes to buy a house. The fact that Gen Z is far above the Gen X and the millennials kind of makes you, kind of throws that whole, they're not responsible, they're lazy, kind of throws that right out the window. So I hope he takes it to heart. But I want to hear your thoughts. Is Gen Z lazy? Are they all lazy? Are they just want to lay around and play video games all day? I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So Georgia Governor Brian Kemp has signed a piece of legislation that would create this new commission. And it would empower this commission to discipline and remove any of those bad prosecutors, or he even said it, far left prosecutors, the ones that are making our communities less safe. We're going to be able to go after those far left prosecutors. He said, I'm not going to stand idly by as rogue or incompetent prosecutors refuse to uphold the law. Today, we are sending a message that we will not forfeit public safety for prosecutors to let criminals off the hook. And I got this thought today that, you know what? Thank goodness they're going to prosecute criminals in Georgia, because today, at least what's been reported, at least 8 of the 16 Georgia Republican electors. They weren't really electors. They were the fake electors. They were the alternative electors. To where if Mike Pence would have done what they wanted him to do, then these fake electors would have been the ones. But ultimately didn't happen. So you've got these 16 Republicans who put their name on the line. At least 8 of them have accepted immunity, which means maybe they're going to maybe they're going to go after criminals in Georgia. You know, maybe ones that make phone calls, saying, "Hey, go find me votes," or else, Now, what's interesting is, I know where this is going. This is going after Fani Willis and the Fulton County District Attorney, who is pursuing, this whole thing. The perfect phone call, the fake electors. This is kind of a big deal. What happens now that this is law? And Brian Kemp goes, you know what? Fani Willis has got to go. We're going to throw her out. Could this be what helps Trump, stay out of trouble, at least in Georgia? I'm thinking it could be. And it could also, because I've been saying that Brian Kemp, from the beginning, Brian Kemp was a guy that I say, maybe worry about because, he's a good old boy and he knows how to get things done. Now, I don't think he's going to get far once you find the family history, because he's only one generation off the plantation, running the plantation, that is. But the thing is, MAGA world could love this. He's going to free up Trump to not get prosecuted, so he's got the MAGA bona fides, and look, he's a smooth talker. And he could be the guy who says, "Hey, we're going to move forward. I'm as Trumpy as anyone. Trust me, I'm as MAGA as anyone. But I want to move forward. I want to do all this other stuff and maybe have an agenda." As where Trump just seems to want to take us backwards. In fact, evidently he's saying that he wants to bring the Muslim bans back. Whenever things are bad, it's bad when they start breaking out the oldies. And the oldie here being, hey, we're going to go get those people. More divide and conquer. Now, the good thing is the Democrats are going to help because evidently Joe Manchin hasn't ruled out a third-party run for president, because I think he knows he's going to get beaten in West Virginia by Jim Justice. But the no labels folks, they're pushing. And you know who's behind it? Trader Joe Lieberman. I got to tell you, I didn't even know he was still around. But I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1886. That was the day Wisconsin state militia shot down workers striking for the 8-hour day in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, killing 7. It's known as the Bayview Massacre. As cities across America erupted into strikes for the 8-hour day, municipal workers in Milwaukee had already won shorter working hours. Many private employers had followed suit. The Central Labor Union and the Knights of Labor mobilized thousands in the campaign to bring the rest of the city's employers into line. Building tradesmen joined Polish, German, and Native American laborers in strikes and marches across the city for nearly a week. They marched to area factories, calling out to workers to join the strike. By May 3rd, every factory in town was shut down except for the Milwaukee Iron Company rolling mill in Bayview. Workers marched to the mills and demanded workers join them. At this point, Governor Rusk called out the militia. They formed a line just inside the gate to prevent strikers from reaching mill workers. As the events of Haymarket unfolded in Chicago that evening, area businessmen became increasingly fearful of upheaval brewing in the city. Governor Rusk gave the shoot-to-kill order should any striker attempt to enter the mills. The next morning, as 1,500 strikers marched toward the mill, they were fired upon by militia. 7 were killed, many more injured. Strikes for the 8-hour day ended abruptly. Many union leaders were indicted, and Polish workers were practically blacklisted from working in the city for their radicalism. Though the massacres shattered hopes for the 8-hour day, Milwaukeeans responded by electing populists and socialists in local and regional elections for years to come. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
When public officials get themselves mired in the muck of corruption, they can always count on Senator Ted Cruz to issue a moral judgment. If the offender is a Democrat, he pronounces the corruption inexcusably grotesque. If it's a Republican, he wails that the offender is the victim. For example, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas was recently caught, yet again, butt deep in judicial immorality, taking hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of freebies from a Texas real estate baron who has both a partisan and corporate interest in Thomas's court rulings. So, Cruz to the rescue. No judicial impropriety here, he squawks, for this is nothing but a diabolical plot by Democrats to smear poor Clarence. But Thomas is busy smearing himself, so Dems can just take the advice of Woodrow Wilson. Never attempt to murder a man who's committing suicide. From the start of his court tenure, Thomas has been a shameless seeker of personal gain, tucking untold sums from untold sources in the inner pockets of his judicial robes. He learned to hide his corruption in 2004 when he actually reported taking pricey gifts from a special interest, which got him widely condemned. So he reformed. No, he didn't quit taking gimmies, he just quit disclosing them. Thomas is a supreme grifter, but sadly he's not alone. Many recent justices have fallen from the pedestal of judicial integrity, cozying up to the moneyed interests. Gifts aside, we now have a hyper-partisan right-wing Republican majority taking their judicial opinions from those same interests, turning America's unelected third branch of government into an autocratic, plutocratic political agency. Then they wonder why their public approval rating and legitimacy are in the ditch. This is Jim Hightower saying, since they won't reform themselves, we must do it for them. To help, go to fixthecourt.com. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is made possible by you subscribers to Jim Hightower's Lowdown on Substack. Find us at jimhightower.substack.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as we're seeing all across the country, Republicans doing their foolhardy best, pushing more restrictions and obstacles on voting, ceding more power to the hands of their ideological wet dreams while simultaneously pushing the deregulation fetish. You got to give them credit. When they get power, they know how to abuse it. Some lessons to be learned there, and here to share some thoughts on a couple of the most recent bits out of Texas on the voting rights front, and also a bunch of preemption stuff. I've asked Jeremy Wallace to come talk with us. Jeremy is the political writer for the Houston Chronicle and the San Antonio Express News. Jeremy, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, I'm so glad to be on the show. Thanks for having me on, Rick.
So let's start with this voting bill. Most of them have been in the way of, we've seen the caging of the past. We've seen, people being thrown off the voting rolls because they're supposedly going to be felons at some point. We've seen the blocking of throwing people off of lists. We've seen, all kinds of gimmicks. This one's a little bit more interesting what they're doing in Texas. As I understand it, they're going to go into a particular county, I guess, and decide, maybe we're not going to have this result. Am I getting this right?
Yeah, this is not your garden variety elections bill. So there's a bunch of them. Like the legislature here only meets every 2 years. once every 2 years. So they'll do a lot of stuff quickly, right? But this time around, they ended up with this monster bill. Like everybody's tracking all these different bills, but this one was kind of tucked into everything. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting there in the Texas Senate one day, and here they are, all of a sudden, muscling this bill to the front, which is going to give the governor or the governor's appointee the power to overturn an election in Harris County, Texas, if they ever run out of paper at any of their polling sites ever again. They had some problems in this last election cycle, but their solution for the Republicans, at least, their solution is, oh, okay, we'll allow the governor in precedent-setting nature to be able to essentially overturn the results and call a new result or a new election. And what makes it even more shocking is that it was in November that the county judge, our county administrator here, was elected by just 14,000 votes. It was a close race. Harris County, Texas, is the biggest county in the state. It's where Houston is. It's like we have over 6 million people in the region now. And so you can see all this going on here. And this is the county the Republicans have picked on, the one where the Democrats have now broken through and are starting to win, regularly in that county. It went from being a solidly red county to being ridiculously strongly blue. And now it's the Texas legislature going, whoa, we're not letting that happen anymore. And so now they're going to have this authority. But, I'm assuming this is going to get through the Texas House. It's already flown through the Texas Senate, despite the opposition from the Democrats. And this thing is all queued up and ready to go to give the governor, for the first time ever, the authority to actually overthrow an election. And think about how dangerous that is. Like, as they come back in future election cycles, they can add other stuff onto that.
Sure.
Right. Today, it's just about, okay, you don't have enough paper at a couple polling sites. Next time they go, okay, we're just tacking on a little bit extra here. Now, if we think you've done, haven't done enough, open, voter registration, we can go after you. Or if you didn't have enough precincts in our side of town, maybe we can go out. Who knows what it can go from? But
or just because the narrative is we don't believe the outcome. Like we've got an entire party in this country. I don't know if you've noticed, but they don't believe that the former guy lost, and that's where a lot of this is springing out of. So I think you're absolutely right when you're saying you're normalizing fiddling with our elections. This is because that's what this is. This is normalizing having one person go, I don't like the result. Something weird happened, something that happens, I don't know, occasionally. Now we're going to have an excuse. And like you've said, and I agree with you, it'll be the next thing and the next thing and the next thing.
Well, and the thing is like right now, if you want to get a new election, if you think something's gone wrong, you have to go to a court of law and kind of make your case. And they tried. After the election this last time around, when the judge, county judge, won by a very narrow race, they tried to sue and try to get the election overturned. The judicial system said no. There's not enough here. You haven't proven that the places that ran out of paper, they've never been able to prove that it meant people didn't vote. Most people just went to other polling sites here in Texas, and particularly in Harris County. If one places like has a long line, you can just go to the next one over. You're not stuck at one precinct. So people just went over to the next one, just down the road, and went ahead and voted. We found no evidence that people didn't vote that day because a couple of precincts, ran out of paper.
But here's the thing, Jeremy. Here's my problem with this, because if I'm getting this right, Harris County is a Democratic county.
Right.
You didn't have enough ballots. So even if you take it to the logical conclusion that people didn't vote, and now you're saying they voted, everyone got their opportunity. Even if you're saying that everyone didn't get to vote, why would they be defending and wanting, opposition votes and using that as the reason and the justification? It seemed to me that you'd be okay with Democrats not voting, considering the resources that aren't already divided equally. It just seems curious that this is the direction they're going.
Yeah, and a really big piece to this, there's so many pieces to the whole debate, right? It's like it had me kind of on the edge of my seat. Like I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm not often like, whoa, what did they just say? And I kind of get closer to the seat because here's the thing. It's like, so like I said, in a court of law, you're going to have to prove what's happening. But the language of this legislation doesn't have much to kind of go on. It's like it's really kind of loosey goosey. There just has to be like an assessment, not a legal like evidence brought to the Secretary of State. They can just really bring in just some partisan polling. It can be partisan polling judges in 14 precincts that say, you know what, I thought we didn't have enough paper, and boom, we have triggered this legislation that now, if Harris County decides an election, and I'm here to tell you, Texas gets closer and closer with every election cycle. It's because of the changing demographics, but it's because of Harris County. Harris County has swung so big, so quickly, that is now threatening statewide elected Republicans. Greg Abbott won Harris County in 2014, but he's lost it badly these last 2 times. Same thing with Ted Cruz. He's from Harris County, and he won it the first time he ran, but he got smoked there on his reelection. So, and I'll tell you, I'm going to predict right now. I hate going into too many predictions, but Ted Cruz is going to lose Harris County just as badly as he did in 2018 to Beto O'Rourke.
I hope it's worse. I hope it's worse.
And that is dangerous for the state Republican Party, because now that has switched over, they don't have enough votes to kind of counter, that kind of a move like they used to. They're losing population in places in the Texas Panhandle and in East Texas that would often, they could have overcome whatever happened in Harris County. But now the numbers are getting so bad in Harris County, like even when there's an underperformance, like it's bad news. Think about Joe Biden won Harris County by more than any presidential candidate since LBJ. It's like, and I'm here to tell you, Joe Biden's no LBJ for Texans, and yet he is on the same plane as LBJ, the first Democrat to win by that kind of margin in that county since LBJ. It shocks me.
Nice. I see what you did there. You got that Lloyd Benson in there. Nice for you.
There you go.
But here's the thing. Let's say I defend this because everyone should get the vote and all this. What's the big deal? We're just going to have another election. What's the big deal? Because this has got to be the justification. We're going to have another election, and it's going to be fine. Because why?
Yeah, State Senator Mays Middleton, who's been carrying this bill for the Republican, he's from Galveston County, which is just south of Harris County. He has a few precincts in there. He said, look, there's not going to be another election if you just have enough dang paper. It's like, which is true. It's like if he sees the legislation as a way to like put such fear that, if you run out of, paper, you're going to have a state or a county-wide election again. Now, again, Harris County is huge. This is like asking like both Dakotas to rerun their presidential election potentially, and still much more left over. It's like it's a huge area. So even the cost of it would be put onto Harris County to do the election. So they're going to spend $10, $12, $15 million for a second election potentially on something like this. So he says, look, all you got to do is have enough paper there, and he says, if there's a concern that somebody didn't get their vote counted, again, remember, I said that we haven't been able to prove anybody was turned away.
Right.
Despite all of their lawsuits, despite all their testimony within the Texas legislature, they've never brought someone forward that says, I tried to vote and I couldn't, and I never had another opportunity. It's like never going to show this. But Middleton thing, what we saw happen in November was dangerous enough that we've got to stop it. And it was funny. One of the readers, called me and we were talking about the bill, and he says, it's like, look, you got to understand. Sometimes, like, people are incompetent, and this isn't incompetency led to the paper shortage. There was definitely a screw up, but does that justify this? That's the question. It's like, again, it singles out one county.
Right.
They rejected proposed amendments. Go, like, make sure it applies to everybody. So if the neighboring county that's Republican runs out of paper, shouldn't we do the same thing to them? And the answer was no.
Why?
Because it hadn't happened there. At least that we know of.
It could. I mean, if you're going to do something to one, you got to do it to everyone. But here's the part of this that I see as interesting. The idea of running another election, because you look at what happens in the midterms. There's a drop off in the number of voters. So for me, it looks like as an outsider. Now again, I'm not in Texas. It seems as an outsider, the idea is we really don't want people voting. We want to get fewer votes, so we're going to put this obstacle in the way that if we ever get to use our new toy, this might turn an election.
Oh, absolutely. If you think of think about all those, I always like to look at Louisiana because they have that, that system where then there's a runoff election after the general election, but the turnout drops dramatically, right? A lot of people are like, I'm not doing this again, and so and particularly for Democrats, I think that we've seen the numbers. Democrats fall off in special elections on, anything that's not a presidential race, or
which is insane to me.
So the second run is going to get fewer Democrats out and fewer Republicans too. But the evidence that we have from political science suggests that there'll be fewer Democrats who make that second trip out to that polling site. For whatever reason, there's, we have we can go on a whole economic, discussion on all of that and move on. But so I think that's the thing, it's like you sit there and you try to figure out well, if you do have that second election, the end result might be fewer Democrats to show up. And in this case, if you just have 14,000 fewer of them, you've just won the county judgeship in probably a lot of judicial races and probably some other, countywide races that you never had a shot at.
Yeah, no, they're clearly reading the tea leaves and planning for the next election, which I give Republicans credit for. Look, you go back to 2000, the hanging chads, 2004, you had the caging going on, then they went to the old voter ID thing, and then cross-check. There's always a new scheme. There's always something new to suppress votes, to take people's ability to vote away, and I give them credit. They're always dreaming up new ways to screw over voters. You listen to the Rick Smith Show here with Jeremy Wallace. Jeremy is a political writer for the Houston Chronicle and the San Antonio Express News. HoustonChronicle.com, the website, if you want to check out the work that he does there. I got to get, before we wrap up, I got to get this House bill, what is it, 2127? It looks like a giant preemption bill. It looks like you local people, again, I remember when Republicans used to believe in small, less intrusive government. They used to believe in local government, to get that fascistic governor out of our way. It used to be, maybe it's been a long time, but they used to believe in local control. This seems to be the antithesis of local control. This seems to be going, sorry, I know you'd like to have a paid sick day ordinance or higher minimum wage or whatever. We want to make sure that the water's clean. Sorry, you can't do that. We'll decide. This seems to be, and like I said, the antithesis of that small local control that they used to tell me they believed in.
Yeah, absolutely. For years, we've been seeing the Republicans in the Texas legislature and really nationwide kind of going after these cities, these big Democratic run cities, think of Miami, think about, Philadelphia, think about New York City. It's like there's always some tension out there, right? In Texas, that tension's been there too. But man, this one is so aggressive. It's gotten the name the Death Star because how much it encompasses. This is the thing that takes so much local control. So even how you regulate a puppy mill, is no longer going to be, compliant with the law. Now you have to go to the state, oh wait, you want to, try to have any sort of regulation in local ordinances. You're going to have to make sure the state doesn't already have something, so it's really taking a lot of power away. And it goes to that tension. It really is a good extension off of what we've seen in Harris County, right? When Harris County was still so Republican, and you had Republican county judge running the places and a majority on the county commission there, they would pick on them, but not like this. But now that the biggest city and all of the biggest cities now in Texas have finally gone blue, it was slower than a lot of the other parts of this country. We are Texans, but we ended up, finally, to the point where all of the big major cities now are Democratic, and in the big, metro counties are Democratic. And so that has changed the entire philosophy. Now you get people getting elected who are like, you know what? We're not going to let you expand your city boundaries without a war. We're not going to let you, have different regulations on your, law enforcement than we have. We're not going to let you, regulate, like I mentioned earlier, anything from puppy mills to, sign ordinances to whatever. Now all of that is ours. It's like, and so I think it's part of the extension of Republicans in the state of Texas fighting the urbanness and the urban change that has happened in Texas. It's really created a war between these two elements that man, it just wasn't like this before.
Yeah,
Like
no.
now it feels like it's constantly every bill that comes up in the legislature, it feels like a war between the rural communities and the urban communities. And it's sad because like look, it's a huge state. I drove from Houston to Spearman, Texas, which is so far north you're almost in Oklahoma, and some would say you are in Oklahoma. But and I thought to myself, these people have no idea how each other lives,
Yep.
and nor do they know how each other has to govern things. They have no clue. Like you're in one community where 99.9% of the people are black, another community where 99.9% of the people are white. And so what do you have there? It's like one's rural, one's urban, one has schools that are struggling, one has like this rural school system that's, it's hard to kind of tell if they're struggling or not. But so you have all these differences, and it's hard to kind of bring it all together. And what the legislature's kind of doing, again, I don't know if it's intentional, but it's further pitting rural voters against the urban voters. That what's going wrong in Texas is because of you people. And the people in the cities are like, oh my God, we're just trying to get health care. We're trying to legalize marijuana. We're trying to get rid of, throwing people in jail for a small amount of pot. But the rural people are like, nope, we're not doing any of that.
No,
And
it's
like,
weird.
so
Because I'm glad you brought that up, because it's not just Texas that does this, by the way. It's Philadelphia, it's Pittsburgh, and then they joke about it being Alabama in the middle. But it's always the war between the urbans and the rurals. And I've been fortunate enough to live in both areas. And when you talk to people about specific issues individually, I think most people get that it's a construct, because most people want the same thing: good schools, safe neighborhoods, decent infrastructure, broadband access, those kind of things. But yet we're always pitted against each other. It's one of those, it's the next level of separating and segregating us, so that we're pitted against each other, so we never get the things that we want. And maybe this is little bit deeper than you want to go into, but we've been sliced and diced and pitted against each other: white, black, male, female, gay, straight, however you want to put it. White collar, blue collar, pink collar, ring around the collar, it doesn't matter. As long as we're eating each other, we're continually getting screwed, because we've got a billionaire class that's walking away with all the wealth, and we're fighting over crumbs. And for me, going into some of these places over the years that used to be the manufacturing hub of their area, that have been left behind, everybody's struggling. But as long as they keep us in this, in our silos fighting each other, we never get what we need. And that's the frustration in all this for me, Jeremy.
Yeah, well, and man, you just hit it right there. So that's the problem I see right now, where it's like, in rural Muleshoe, Texas, right? You feel like it's like on another planet than you are in Houston. But I was up there and I'm talking to people, and you realize some of the same issues and things that they're concerned about are the same in Houston. And instead of the politicians going, you know what, we can kind of reach out to both these. Let's find that compromise. It's like, we understand your urban community doesn't have this, but you need the mental health services too, and we do too. Surprisingly, we've realized we need more too. We need community hospitals in a way that maybe the underserved urban areas need them too. Like the food deserts we talk about, like it's the same thing's happening in both those. There's so much that binds those people together, it's kind of it's sad to say, it's kind of like bipartisanship. Like that is it's more politically useful to pit everybody against each other. And in this case, it's pitting these rural and urban people against each other when they may have more in common than they all understand, but the politicians aren't doing the work to kind of show that.
But this is where I get a little cynical, Jeremy, and I know you've been doing this a long time, as I have. I've gotten a little cynical over our political leaders, because it seems more about getting attention and holding on to our seats and getting campaign money than actually doing the hard work of moving us forward. So we get our little silo issue and we fight for this and we're not moving, and then you got it over here, and then we just snipe at each other. And this is the frustration that I have with our political system, because we've got big problems on the horizon. AI is going to eat all of our lunch, and we're not even talking about how we harness this monster, but we're talking about who uses what bathroom. And I don't give a rat's behind who uses what bathroom. I'm worried about putting food on the table and keeping a roof over my kid's head. And for me, this is where we need to get back to. And I think this kind of stuff, this consolidation of power, is dangerous. And I don't care if the Democrats were doing this, I'd be just as against it as I am when the Republicans are doing.
Yeah, I think that this time calls for some politicians who would be brave enough to say, "Look, I'm going to represent both ends of this thing. Damn the election results. I'm just going to go at this." And I'm not sure. And I think there was a point where, like, I don't want to be nostalgic about the good old days type stuff, but it felt like there was a period of time, again, I don't want to elevate this too much, when Clinton was working with, the Republicans in the House for welfare reform stuff, maybe it didn't work out how everybody wanted it to, or, even back in the 80s when, like, George H.W. Bush was working with Democrats, like he wanted to keep Planned Parenthood going, and he was getting pressure from the Republicans, but he was pro-life at the same time. So you could see the complication, but there was more negotiation, discussion about those things. Now it's just so hard. Like, no, you're pro-life, you're pro-choice, you're, pro-gun, I'm anti-gun. It's like, and off we go. It's like, and I think it'd be nice to have somebody who could just kind of maybe talk a little bit more about how there's a lot more of us who are similar, even if like you brought up, the skin colors are different or the neighborhoods are different. There's so much more we have in common. We just don't know it yet because it's too big of a state for us to know it. But the politicians have seen it all. Like, so, like, here's a clarion call that will go unanswered, but, Ted Cruz and John Cornyn have the best perspective on knowing this, right? Because they've been around the state the most. And so they are in the best position to say, look, it's like, we don't have to demonize those people over there. But the question is, what does that mean to them politically if they stop doing that?
No, but here's the thing. I don't blame the politicians. I don't blame politicians at all because they're tools. I blame us, the voters, for allowing ourselves to be hoodwinked into the red hat, blue hat frame. For me, it's not red hat, blue hat versus R or D. For me, it's always been up down. It's always been the very wealthy who control all of these institutions against the rest of us. And there used to be things that were nonpartisan. They weren't Republican or Democratic issues. They were human people issues, and on both sides demanded results. I'm just not seeing that. I see us, I've done some door knocking, and the first question people ask, what are you? I'm a citizen. No, what are you? And I've got to identify my hat right away before we talk about anything. That's insane to me. And until we change, I fear this kind of stuff is going to continue.
Yeah, one of the ones that drives me the craziest is the use of medical marijuana, particularly for our veterans suffering from PTSD. The fact that we can't come to some sort of agreement in Texas to allow that to happen, while
That's
other
nuts.
states that is happening. We literally have, all these studies and research and the examples from the other states that proves this could really help some of these guys and women who come back and are just are having a hard time. And instead of giving them this, we are just leaving them out to dry. And I think it's largely because of politics.
Sure. It's insane to me, though. We've got medical heroin.
Yes.
But
yes.
we can't have medical pot? How crazy is that? That's
for the veterans, for
me.
the old. Yeah, when I worked in Florida at one point, I just remember the Republicans started to turn, in support for medical marijuana, because it turned out all the older folks who had arthritis were like, hey, this is great. This is really helping me. It's just like, why can't we do more of this? And then that's got the ball rolling. We just haven't had that happen in Texas at this point, where it's just like come on, there are things we can do that just helps everybody. It's kind of what you said, when you get down to the base level, how do we just make sure everybody's going to be healthy enough to go to school and not get shot?
I'm right there with you.
Can we do that? It's like, I think we all want that, right? Nobody wants anybody to be hurt or suffering or not get an education. I think we all want that.
Absolutely. Jeremy Wallace, I appreciate the time. Great conversation. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again real soon.
Anytime, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Jeremy Wallace. He's the political writer over at the Houston Chronicle and San Antonio Express News. Check out the website, HoustonChronicle.com. What a great guy. Gonna take a quick break. Right back. Stick around.
For my gas stoves. All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and
snarky comment.
You can have my gas stove when you pry it from my cold, dead hand.
See? Fox News was right again. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, I think you have some apologies to make here.
How so?
Well, with the news out of New York, it's clear that Fox was right. They're all coming to ban our stoves.
Yes, how dare you make me spend less on energy? It's horrible.
What other troubling news do you have for us today, Des?
Well, first, in Europe, officials are warning of a hot and dry summer ahead after an unusually dry and warm winter, with snowpack in the Alps only about 25% of normal. Italy's largest river, the Po, is already as low as it was at the height of last summer, impacting tourism and shipping. Because of low river flow, seawater is intruding further upriver, endangering crops and drinking water supplies. But officials say coastal barriers to prevent saltwater intrusion are still years away from completion. Spain just had its hottest April on record and is suffering under an intense summer-like heat wave that has triggered an unusually early wildfire season on top of a deepening 5-year drought that has depleted reservoirs and decimated crops. With water reserves at 50% of capacity nationally, government officials have requested emergency relief from the European Commission's Agriculture Relief Fund. In an interview with TRT World News, U.S. climate scientist Peter Kalmus noted extreme heat events are becoming more frequent, and he warned that unless governments move faster to cut their emissions, the combination of intense heat and drought will get worse everywhere.
The heat will become much more extreme. I think this is still just the barest beginnings of what we're going to be experiencing in the next few years and then even in the next few decades.
Maybe we should burn less natural gas.
The United Nations warned this week that the return of the warming El Nino climate pattern this summer will likely shatter recent heat records, and they called on governments around the world to get ready for more extreme weather. A recent report estimated that last year's heat waves in Europe likely killed more than 20,000 people. But Europe is taking action. The European Union just finalized a major climate law that has been described as the biggest climate protection law of all time. It puts the EU on track to cut its emissions nearly in half by 2030. It includes a just transition fund to shield vulnerable households from rising energy prices, and it contains the world's first carbon border tax. Beginning in 2026, the carbon border tax will be levied on imports of emissions-intensive products like steel and fertilizers to ensure that as European companies decarbonize, they won't be undercut by imports from countries with lax emissions rules.
Smart.
And manufacturers can't move production overseas to evade the EU's new emission standards.
Also smart.
Here in the U.S., General Motors announced it is discontinuing production of its very popular, affordable, all-electric Chevy Bolt, despite its record sales. GM will instead offer what it says will be new, affordable midsize EV models.
Why would they do that?
Industry experts say it's about profits. Pickups and SUVs have higher profit margins. The UN International Energy Agency this week reports that electric car sales surged by 55% last year. The IEA projects that 1 in 5 cars sold in 2023 will be electric, a new record.
Cool.
China, which leads global battery production, dominated the global market with 60% of electric car sales in 2022. And finally, New York this week became the first state in the nation to ban natural gas and other polluting fossil fuels in most new building construction, starting in 2026. The new law phases out gas-burning stoves, furnaces, and propane heating. It exempts large commercial and industrial buildings like hospitals and restaurants and does not apply to existing residences. Fossil fuel interests are expected to sue to stop the new emission standards, and it's important because buildings account for 1/3 of New York's climate warming emissions. So phasing out polluting natural gas is necessary because methane gas is a more potent climate warming gas than carbon dioxide, and electrifying buildings will have a dramatic and positive health impact for New Yorkers.
Wait, this is only for new buildings?
Yes.
So I can keep my gas stove?
Exactly.
I think I owe someone an apology. For much more on all of those stories and the ones we didn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. No, they're not coming for your gas stoves.
Are you
you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, British voters not happy. New report from the BBC. Evidently, they're now coming around over in the UK to this idea of voter ID. Nobody's happy because they've always voted in the same place, kind of like it happened here. You've been going to the same polling place for years and years and years, and now you got to bring your ID, and now they're turning you away. Well, this is what's happening over across the pond, and they're not happy. But hey, the good thing is we're getting used to it, and Republicans are finding new ways to attack people to keep them from voting because that wasn't enough. It looks like Ohio is going after some college students with their new voter ID, and here to share some thoughts on all the things that's going on there. I've asked our good friend David Pepper to come share some thoughts. He's a former Democratic chair, also the author of Laboratories of Autocracy, a wake-up call from behind the lines. David, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you. Good to be back with you.
So, the British voters not thrilled with voter ID, but in Ohio, you've gone kind of like next level voter ID.
We've always had voter ID, but it was you had a number of things you could show. Students on campuses who had, let's say they were from another state, didn't have to switch to an Ohio driver's license. They could show that they lived on campus and use that. It was fine. We haven't had fraud. We haven't had problems, but they have been going after young voters in this state really since Obama won in 2008. They hated that young voters on campuses showed up in big numbers, and they've been trying to do everything they can. They're basically admitting now around the country, when you hear them say we should move the voter age back up to 21, well, this voter ID bill is clearly targeted directly at young voters who especially, again, they're obsessed with the voters who are on campuses here from other states. They just assume they won't get an Ohio ID or Ohio driver's license, and they won't vote here. And so they passed this about, early this year. It took effect a few weeks ago. We're working very hard. I was just on a call with young people about 2 hours ago, trying to make sure that we get the word out. But we think about 800,000 plus Ohio voters who would otherwise be eligible do not have the very narrow forms of ID that they now need to have. And that's disproportionately Black voters, disproportionately young voters. And it's sort of almost a silent suppression. When the voter ID law officially took effect, that entire week, the Secretary of State, who talks about everything under the sun, didn't even mention it. On the website, you wouldn't even known it was there. It was coming. So it's really just I worry that after a decade of trying to really make it harder for young voters, this is the probably the most effective and cynical tool they've come up with, which is a much stricter, the most strict in the country, I'm told. And of course, student IDs don't count. So Ohio State's ID or whatever other school, that's not good enough because they don't want young people voting.
See, when this first came up, I think it was 2011 when it came up here in Pennsylvania. I said, I'm not against, identifying who I am, or because when I registered, I had to show ID and all this. But if you're going to mandate this and you're going to narrowly define which IDs are okay, I think it's the responsibility of the state to ensure that the voters get what they are mandating that the voters have, because a lot of people don't have driver's license. A lot of people, they don't drive. So I've been in the mindset that it should be the state's responsibility, and it should be an easier process to get this. Like, for the next couple of election cycles, if you're going to mandate this, you should be able to have, on site, someone who can help with this so that we're not turning people away. It's hard enough to get people to come to vote, and you're turning people who are away who are there. I got a problem with that.
Yeah. And, you mentioned the driver's licenses. Younger people aren't driving nearly as much. I think the number is at about only 40% of I think 40% of 18-year-olds don't have a driver's license. I think at 22, it's like 28% don't. That's huge numbers of voters. And it used to be that it was hard enough to get people to register. Now it's register plus a whole bureaucratic process. And again, I went to school outside of Ohio. I wasn't going to change for my Ohio driver's license. They know that. And so, yeah, this is a real effort to go after using. Now, there is an Ohio state ID that doesn't require a driver's license, and that's what we're going to try and help a lot of people get. But the basic requirement that most people, would normally think about is this driver's license, and we just know that both young people, again, seniors, and disproportionately poor, disproportionately Black voters are far less likely to have this ID, and that's why they do. That's why they pick the IDs they pick. This is not that they don't even hide it anymore. This is a state that the Secretary of State of Ohio, after the election, brags about how fraud-free it was. So the old justification that came about years ago that this was combating in-person voter fraud, they don't even pretend anymore that that's the case. And Mike DeWine, when he signed it, basically is acknowledging this isn't really a concern. It's targeted voter suppression.
Yeah. In our state, when they passed voter ID here in Pennsylvania, before our state Supreme Court threw it out, Mike Turzai, the Speaker of the House, gave a speech and was very clear of why they passed voter ID, and that was to get Governor Romney elected. There was that famous little clip of his, because you're right, they're not even hiding it.
Yeah, no, you're right. He was helpful in admitting it, but they basically now, whatever it is, they're really not hiding that this is about power. This is a group of people that is threatened by a diverse coalition that cost them power, and Obama motivated that coalition. They don't want, and that coalition is young voters, voters of color, women, and whatever they can do to pull out pieces of that coalition that, if it were fully active, would be a majority, they are eager to do.
Yeah, I'd forgotten.
And they don't hide it. I mean, here's an example. I mean, so you have this strict photo ID now to vote in person, but not to vote by mail. When in-person voter fraud is very difficult as a scheme, it'd be easier to do it in other ways, and they don't have it for that. So even that just doesn't make sense. I mean, it really is it's just voter suppression. And there's no, and they say it's free. Well, tracking down a birth certificate if you don't have one, other documents, isn't free. And we're working hard to make it free for people if they get the right information. But the basic process costs working people time to go to the BMV or somewhere else, money, et cetera, which if you're working really hard and several jobs in the wrong shift, it's real hard to do all that stuff.
No, it is. But I remember, in the pretrial to the voter ID law here, the pretrial stipulation, the state actually admitted that the law that they passed, and this is brilliant, would have stopped no form of voter fraud at all. There had never been any case that they could identify, either locally, state, or across the country, that this law would have stopped. It was really a brilliant document in that they admitted that it does nothing, but they believe they should have gone forward because they believed it. It's just crazy. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show here with David Pepper, former chairman of the Ohio Democratic Party and also author of Laboratories of Autocracy, a wake-up call from behind the lines. But this power grab that you just said a moment ago doesn't stop it at suppressing votes. Now we want to make it even harder to get amendments put forth, anything on the ballots put forth. What happened to democracy?
I mean, they basically admit they are afraid of the majority of Ohio voters. When you have these super gerrymandered legislatures that are generally pushing laws that are deeply unpopular, they are threatened in any state that allows the people to go directly to the ballot, because that is how that state, we saw this in Kansas last year, that is how that state can basically undo the work of a gerrymandered legislature to advance basically a minority viewpoint as law. And so right now, what are they doing in Ohio? There's a group of people gathering signatures quickly to put an amendment on the ballot to enshrine the right to choose on the Ohio Constitution, it has about 58% support in the polls. It's a majority view. And so they're rushing as fast as they can to have a special election in August to lift the threshold to amend our Constitution to 60% so that they get in front of the majority of Ohioans actually protecting choice. This is a group of people that literally only months ago eliminated the ability of having August elections. And now they're trying to bring them back for their constitutional amendment to forever have a 60% threshold. So they're literally rigging the rules to rig the rules against majority rule in the state of Ohio. And by the way, this is also part of a national playbook. They're going to do this in other states. They tried this in Arkansas. They are and this is such a clear symbol of the current MO, which is they are afraid of the majority of Americans having their will reflected in law. So in states where that can happen through constitutional amendments, they are working to kill that vehicle for the people. It's a total power grab by politicians. In this case, we also happen to be the most corrupt state house in the country. So which makes it a somewhat easy argument. Do you really want to give the most corrupt state house in the country more power at the expense of the people of that state? I hope the answer will very clearly be no.
Yeah, I hope so too. But hey, at least you're not Texas. I mean,
Right.
Texas is doing some pretty interesting things as well around voter suppression and preemption laws and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, the truth is, all these states, it's a national agenda. They're simply vehicles for a national agenda. So if something happens here, it's going to happen elsewhere, vice versa. It's these ideas are not being cooked up in Columbus by the legislators who put them forward. They're being cooked up in conference rooms and DC think tanks, in boardrooms around the country, and they're brought to these states, which are this is going to sound over the top, but it's just true. These are state houses essentially hijacked by extremists with almost no connection back to the people of the states anymore because of gerrymandering and tools like this to further remove them from the people. All of a sudden you have 60% come together to reflect itself. Well, that's because the current state house is doing things that 60% don't agree with. They want to keep us from being able to have our say. So they're kind of all the same at this point. I mean, one week it's Missouri, the next week it's Tennessee, the next week's in Texas. It's not like each state is doing this on their own. It's a much broader agenda, coordinated, and always sharing what they're doing amongst each other. If something works in one place, it works somewhere else, which, by the way, is a major motivator. If you kill something really badly, like this terrible idea here, the hope is we kill it elsewhere too. Because if they waste a bunch of money and time on something that looks like a dead-out loser, maybe it won't come to another state. It's not worth the fight for them. No. So if you could defeat something with gusto, you might do everyone else a favor in the process.
So in talking to people, do you get the sense that folks get this, or, because I had asked a couple of my relatives in Ohio if they'd heard about it or if they cared about it, and they hadn't heard about any of it. Is this getting out?
It's building. I was at the rally on Wednesday. We had a really good sort of late organized rally. It did remind me of that old labor fight we had 10 years ago. The people who are there see it. They're gearing for a fight. They enjoyed being up there and speaking truth to power. And my guess is, and the big vote is this coming Wednesday, if they do push this, I think it could get really big. And you've seen these things get big. I think this could get big. One of the things that's helping, and I'm normally not praising some of these folks, but John Kasich came out and said, this is a horrific idea, a stupid idea. It's undemocratic. Former Governor Taft, kind of an old school, establishment Republican, former Secretary of State, said, terrible idea. Former attorneys general are saying it, Republicans. So this kind of has the makings of even Republicans saying it's bad, that they are getting too arrogant, too extreme in an August election. If that's when they do it, if the majority see that clearly, just like happened in Kansas a year ago, we might be able to overwhelm them because that side gets so upset about it, and it becomes not just a Democrat or Republican thing, but a much broader coalition. The Libertarian Party came out against this earlier this week. I mean, they see this as a problem. There are certain right-wing interest groups who themselves want to go to the Constitution, and they don't like it. And of course, if you care about the minimum wage being raised, you care about a woman's right to choose, all those groups are also appalled by this. So it may end up unifying a whole lot of people that very rarely are on the same page.
So last question I've got for you then, electorally, will this overreach, will they pay a price for it? Or is Ohio so badly gerrymandered and so far lost that it's not going to matter, and they know that?
I think, we had our big labor battle in 11, and it did not translate into wins after that, although it was a thrashing of the attack on collective bargaining. We really went to town. And the hope would be, especially if this pro-choice amendment gets on the ballot in November, the hope would be if they do this in August, that does build momentum of the sort of the pro-democracy side, the majority who supports a woman's right to choose, then it does build into a successful November. And if I'm Sherrod Brown of the Ohio Democratic Party, I'm getting involved with this in a way that I want to get every single petition circulator. I want to get every single new voter registered. I want to get voter IDs in the hands of the people who vote this time so they have it for next time. So I think the smart play is to use it to build that and not let it just be a one moment thing, but something that's much bigger. Yeah. And one of the things I hope that we can all benefit from in 24 is they have hidden for a long time quite well how extreme they've gotten, how much in the minority they've gotten. And the hope is that whether it's Marjorie Taylor Greene being the leader of the House, whether it's a DeSantis-Trump primary, or things like this, that they're starting to really show that they're far out of the mainstream in a way that they aren't good at hiding anymore. And that could actually also set up some contrast as we head into 24.
Let us hope, because this is just outrageous. But David, I appreciate you taking some time, filling us in on what's going on in Ohio. Thanks so much.
Okay, take care.
David Pepper, former chair of the Ohio Democratic Party. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
It's interesting David brought up the 2011, really an uprising of working class voters in Ohio who turned back John Kasich's no rights at work push. And I still remember, because we took the show there in the week prior to the election, and we were out in the street talking to people, and the sentiment, you got the feeling that this could have been a mobilizing moment, that this could have been an opportunity for labor to really, because look, the state of Ohio it was like 2/3 of the vote. I mean, it was a serious thrashing. 2/3 of voters came out and said, no, we don't want to be a no rights at work state. We don't want to be a right to work for less state. We want to be a state where if you work hard, you play by the rules, you get ahead, you get to sit down and you get to bargain, want to be a right to bargain state. And overwhelmingly, but interestingly enough, on the other side was the question of the Affordable Care Act. and voters were not happy with what was thrown into that. So, when you look at what the Republicans in Ohio are doing right now to try and make it harder, make the obstacles harder to get things, done on the amendment level, it's nonpartisan. I mean, David framed it as, it's bipartisan. It's really not. And this isn't a right-left thing. It's the reason that Joe Walsh and I have become friendly. It's the reason that, people that I had viewed as extreme in the past, and look, on issues, we're going to be completely in different camps. It's the reason that we're on the same page. This is about democracy. This is about the mechanism. It's not partisan in my view. But he's right. Pepper's right in saying, look, if it's happening in Ohio, it's going to go across. It's going to go across the country, because the moneyed interests have a view of what this country should be. And you've got the original intent people. Antonin Scalia was a huge original intent guy. Blacks are 3/5 people. Women can't vote. Only white landowning males over 21 can vote. The original intent. There are people who are working, spending big money, billionaires from all over the place spending big money to push us in that direction. Democracy be damned. And the right loves to tell me, and they do it all the time, Rick, we're not a democracy. We're a constitutionally limited democratic republic. And you go, yeah, in a democratic fashion, we vote for our representatives. Our representatives go and do what we collectively want them to do. That's how this thing works. If the majority of the people want a road fixed, that's a priority. Go help us get that done. We elect representatives to help us get the things done that we need to get done. Not the moneyed interest. And this is where I keep coming back to this moment of, I said it earlier, I don't necessarily blame the politicians. I blame us for being easily divided, easily pitted against each other, easily sliced and diced, and narrow interests here and there. The idea that, and this is where I come back to, that everything has to be framed in the right-left world, in the red hat, blue hat world, instead of what's in the best interest of working people. And this is where my mind is. Look, there are some people who do not identify with working class principles and working class ideology. I get that, but understand, people who punch a clock, people who go to work every day and collect a paycheck at the end of the week, that's the majority, the vast majority of the people in this country. You would think that we'd have something in common, and we'd want politicians to move stuff like that. We used to be that society. Didn't always agree on everything, but on the economic stuff, we were doing okay. Until the moneyed interest started pushing back, and aggressively, and brought us the F channel, and brought us the end of the fairness doctrine, and brought us this kind of indoctrination media. And then we fell into the silo. Question is, how do we move away from that? And how do we take on bad legislation like we're seeing in Ohio or Texas? I keep coming back to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. We used to believe in that as a country. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you miss any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. You shall find ours. Back after this. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1931. That was the day that became known as the Battle of Harlan, or the Battle for Everts. Harlan County, Kentucky was coal country. Miners worked long hours underground and faced dangerous and often deadly working conditions. If they attempted to form a union, they risked not only losing their jobs, but also getting evicted from their company housing. Despite this response, starting in the 1920s, the United Mine Workers of America began to make headway in organizing miners. In Harlan, the miners who dared organize were fired. They and their families were thrown out of their homes. The company brought in hired guns to enforce the evictions and to keep the union out of the mines. Union miners and these gun thugs met on the road outside of the town of Everts. A gun battle broke out. 3 company men and 1 miner were killed. The governor of Kentucky once admitted, quote, "There exists a virtual reign of terror in Harlan County, financed in general by a group of coal mine operators in collusion with certain public officials. The victims of this reign of terror are the coal miners and their families." The Harlan County mine wars raged on for the next decade. In all, 13 miners would give their lives trying to bring a union to the Kentucky coal fields. It was one of the bloodiest struggles of the U.S. labor movement. Bloody Harlan earned its nickname.
They say in Harlan County there are no neutrals there. You either be a union man or a foe, the church clan. Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on?
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
When public officials get themselves mired in the muck of corruption, they can always count on Senator Ted Cruz to issue a moral judgment. If the offender is a Democrat, he pronounces the corruption inexcusably grotesque. If it's a Republican, he wails that the offender is the victim. For example, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas was recently caught, yet again, butt deep in judicial immorality, taking hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of freebies from a Texas real estate baron who has both a partisan and corporate interest in Thomas's court rulings. So, Cruz to the rescue. "No judicial impropriety here," he squawks, "for this is nothing but a diabolical plot by Democrats to smear poor Clarence." But Thomas is busy smearing himself, so Dems can just take the advice of Woodrow Wilson. Never attempt to murder a man who's committing suicide. From the start of his court tenure, Thomas has been a shameless seeker of personal gain, tucking untold sums from untold sources in the inner pockets of his judicial robes. He learned to hide his corruption in 2004 when he actually reported taking pricey gifts from a special interest, which got him widely condemned. So, he reformed. No, he didn't quit taking gimmies, he just quit disclosing them. Thomas is a supreme grifter, but sadly he's not alone. Many recent justices have fallen from the pedestal of judicial integrity, cozying up to the moneyed interests. Gifts aside, we now have a hyper-partisan right-wing Republican majority taking their judicial opinions from those same interests, turning America's unelected third branch of government into an autocratic, plutocratic political agency. Then they wonder why their public approval rating and legitimacy are in the ditch. This is Jim Hightower saying, since they won't reform themselves, we must do it for them. To help, go to fixthecourt.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, I find this hard to believe that it looks like we're pretty much split almost down the middle on the debt ceiling fight. In fact, the Washington Post just put out an ABC poll that found 39% of Americans would blame the Republicans in Congress if government goes into default. 36% would blame Biden. 16% they say they're all bad. Which I kind of get, they're all bad if you're one of them, but I no idea how you go. Yeah, we're just not going to pay our bills, and that's Biden's fault. Crazy. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the top stories of the day. Maybe get us a different perspective. I've asked my good friend former Ohio Congressman and political analyst Bob Ney to come share some thoughts. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thank you, Rick.
So, I know you're in India doing your vacation and that. Is this playing there? I mean, is there any talk of a potential default by the U.S.? Is this something that's in the news there at all?
No, not at all. I mean, I'm still following our news, and I've got a compromise. Let's blame it on Obama. How about that? We'll just go back and blame it on Obama.
No, blame it on Hillary.
The only thing that I hear over here since I've been here, and I talk to people, I ask them, what do you think? And they just, okay. The United States would like to be friendlier with them, and that's how it ends. Of course, they just exceeded China in population, and China, of course, is trying to take over the world currency. So I think if we got a little closer to India, it might help because they now have more people than China. But back to the poll, the Washington Post, ABC News did that poll, as you said, and it's divided. And now you look at, 39% of the people are going to say it's the Republicans, if they go in default. And then 36 are going to blame Biden. So what does that kind of tell you? Everybody's going to get a jab on this. Pretty equal.
Yeah.
Now, the Republicans may say, well, that's great because, we didn't win the Senate. And, hey, half of them are going to blame Biden. But that doesn't mean that will give them salvation in the next election. Because if this thing goes real, and look, Rick, you've been with the news for how long? I've been with the news for how long? And, the scenario is the same. When we report, they're to the edge, the drama, and okay, everybody did a continuing resolution. But the issue of default is a lot different even than government shutdown. And right now with the Chinese so overtly trying to make the yuan the currency of the world, this is a gift to them.
Yeah,
it's
this
a gift.
is the worst time to do any of this stuff.
Exactly.
And This is where I come back to. You ask the average American, should we pay our bills? And they're going to go, absolutely. If you ask a Republican, and this is where I lean on them because I identify as a fiscal conservative. I pay my bills. Ask any fiscal conservative, and they're going to go, you pay your bills. The time to argue over spending was before you pulled your wallet out. That's when we argue over this stuff. Right.
And so if I were McCarthy, the Speaker of the House, and I looked at these poll numbers, I don't believe I would say, we're only 3% different than Biden, and we can, do something with this. Also, let me tell you what will get the Republicans too. And this is what has happened time after time. When the stock market starts to tumble and the corporate giants start to make the phone calls, that will wake them up.
No, and this is one of those things, and I'm glad you brought that up because the sad reality is the mainstream corporate controlled media is pushing out this narrative that the economy's bad. We've been hearing we're on the brink of recession or we're close to recession. It's pretty much the entire Biden presidency. It's almost like they're wishing and hoping and doing everything they can do to make that come to fruition. I mean, you look what the Fed's doing alone. I'm surprised we're not in deeper trouble than we are. But you look at the jobs numbers today. We're still creating jobs. Wages are going up now above inflation, and that's good. It seems like this couldn't happen at a worse time. So if you're pulling this stunt now, it's really not about what it's about, other than it's about making Biden look bad and finally getting us that recession that they so think we deserve.
Well, also on top of it, let's throw out the money reality here. A tight election, whether it's Trump versus Biden or DeSantis or Nikki Haley or whoever, what's a tight election do? Gee, it makes people do what? Raise money, and it makes people do what? Spend money. And what do they spend money on? Television ads. Stories. I mean, that's what happens.
No, you're not wrong.
I know that's a plot theory. I understand that, but don't tell me that it's not in the minds of, Rupert and everybody else.
Oh, it is. And look, and thank you, Rupert, for giving us the quote of the century. It's not about red or blue. It's about green because it's what I've been saying all along. It's always about the money.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
So here's
Exactly.
the thing. I mean, I know you're in the Trump's not going to be the candidate camp, and I know you're going to stay there, and I'm still going back and forth a little bit. Evidently, he's flying back or flew back from Scotland, going to cut that trip, short. The stated reason was he's going to confront that woman, but he's got a lot of fires burning. There's a lot of stuff going on that he's going to have to get back in the middle of. Any thoughts?
Well, I don't think, as far as the confronting the woman, of course, there was a deposition tape, correct?
Yes.
Now, that was in October of 2022, I think.
Yes.
Right? So that tape's there. It's been played to the jury. He's not required to be there for that. So as far as confronting the woman, he's a former president of the United States. He can be out in the middle of a village in India, and he can say he wants to make a statement, and the media is going to pick it up, right?
Exactly.
So what does he have to be physically back for? Why couldn't he have stayed 2 more days? Something's going on, something with the corporation and legal team, something where he was required to be back here.
Yeah. Could it be, I don't know, that, the reporting today is more than 8 of the 16 Georgia fake electors have gotten immunity, and I don't know, maybe.
Right.
I don't know, because I think that's real trouble, along with the Fannie Willis, with the perfect phone call and all that. Could it be that? I don't know.
Well, it could. Now, look, I've been reading stories this week, filtering through the news and things like that, and I'm every once in a while these stories are popping up that DOJ, January 6th, these stories are out there. It's the moment for the Attorney General. I don't believe that for a second on the classified documents, because that thing's a nightmare all the way around. But I see that they've got somebody that was at Mar-a-Lago, and I think the real danger is not DOJ. I really don't. I think it's the Georgia, and plus anything else that we don't know about that's going to pop up.
Yeah. So let me ask you, because look, I'm with you. I haven't jumped on any of this. I know when we started off, the left was like Robert Mueller's coming, and there were memes of
right.
Mueller's face in the rearview mirror. I'm not jumping on any of that. But I think what's going on in Georgia could be kind of a real deal. And I find it interesting that Brian Kemp today signed a law that I guess they're going to figure out a way to, maybe get rid of some of the, how did he put it? Get rid of the liberal judge prosecutors, or, because we're going to make them follow the law. So I find it interesting that if Fannie Willis does what I think a lot of people are hoping she does, that maybe they come in and remove her, because they've already laid the groundwork, I think, to do that. Or do you see it differently?
No, you look at now. Of course, the whole prosecutor thing. The bill he signed on Friday or today, it makes it possible. You can oust these district attorneys for office if they're not adequately enforcing the law. That's how that bill is stated that he signed. Now, that's interesting. Adequately enforcing the law is in the eye of the beholder. So definitely they can say, well, this is a malfeasance of the law. She's going after this. That's not enforcing the real law. I mean, when you've got a bill that is that broad that you can remove for not adequately enforcing the law, then you can remove practically anybody. Now, I understand this is on the heels of the whole sources controlling the judicial system theme. I fully understand that, So they can say, well, the timing on this is because of what's going on in other states. We don't want that happening in Georgia. They're letting people run in stores and take everything out they want, which in some cases has happened. So I don't think it's that as much as this might be kind of the ace in the hole if the whole situation goes wrong for Trump in Georgia.
Yeah.
It's in the back pocket.
No, we've been talking about this since DeSantis went after that state's attorney, Andrew Warren, I believe. Andrew Warren is his name. We've had him on the show a couple of times. That was like the first opening salvo of this assault to see if he could get away with it. And now they've put this into law. Going to be interesting to see how this plays out, especially given.
Although, if you were Brian Kemp, would you really want to help Trump?
I've got a
you don't
couple
want
of
to
thoughts on
publicly
this.
say you don't. You know,
I got a couple of thoughts on this. Part of it is you I don't know. There's this part of me that goes, this would make him, like if he let Trump off the hook, this would endear him to the MAGA world.
True.
And
true.
if he were to pull the plug on this, I'm sure there would be some kind of deal. Trump's not gonna run again or whatever. Because I said from the beginning, Kemp is a scary figure for me because he's a likable guy. He knows he's a smart guy, knows how to work the levers, is well funded. His only problem is he's really only one generation off the plantation of being a plantation owner. And I don't know that we're ready for a former plantation, master. I'm just not sure yet, but it'll be interesting to see where this goes.
Well, he could endear himself to Trump. Now, there is one thing. The district attorney, Willis, in Georgia, is going to announce this summer whether she's going to bring charges against Trump or Trump and his allies, all right? With this whole attempt to overturn the election and how they were attempting to do it in Georgia. Now, what's interesting about this, let's just do a scenario here. She comes out this summer. She's going to, say that Trump himself is to be indicted. Georgia moves to remove her because she's not doing her job, quote. I would sense at that point in time, if this scenario happens, I would bet my car. I like my car. I would bet my car that the Department of Justice would have to step in and scrutinize the whole decision by Georgia, and would have the right to step in to scrutinize the decision under this new Georgia law.
Yeah, no, and I'm sure there are going to be lawsuits. There's going to be a lot of legal wrangling over this. I'm sure, but it just seems like they're always a step ahead in moving their agenda. I did want to get your thoughts on something else. Ted Cruz is saying that evidently there's information out there to impeach Joe Biden. Now he hasn't seen it, but evidently there's enough information. He himself has not seen the document, but he's awareness has been raised, and there's been a lot of talk of on the right of there's going to be impeachment of Biden, which seems to be their interesting position. But Geraldo Rivera actually had probably the most interesting comment on this whole scenario. He said, "Does anyone really believe President Joe Biden was involved in a criminal bribery scheme?" He said, "Dollars to donuts. It's another bogus, blowhard, pretend whistleblower hint. If the person announcing a would-be criminal scheme is a partisan politician, it's a partisan political event." Any thoughts on this? Because it's kind of bubbling up right now that there's a whistleblower and they know all this stuff. You put any stock in this?
Well, I think we have to look at the comments too. When you look at Grassley's comments, for example, in the Senate, right? And like anything, when you have criminal cases, and this is really, really important, and if they would ever release, the details on mine, which I've said I'd love to see it. They won't do it, but I'd love to see it. Anytime you have that, you have this flood of people who, when questioned, for example, somebody's questioned about Hunter Biden's taxes, right? And you get somebody that makes a reference of, well, I think this guy knew something. Then the feds go to that guy, and then that guy says, well, yeah, I heard that, the president himself wrote an email. Okay, this is literally, and in my case, I mean, there's some things I do know where, people said my son's 21st birthday party was paid for by lobbyists, just stuff
And
like
your son
that.
was 8.
Yeah, yeah, he was 21, but the best one. This is the best one, and this actually got a reaction out of the Los Angeles Times. The Shah of Iran's daughter gave me a boat. I can't make this up. Yes. Now, of course, she had died of a drug overdose in Paris years before, but yeah, she gave me a boat. That actually, and this is the funniest part of it. And my lawyers, I was there when they made the call to justice and said, by the way, you better look because your agent sold him a boat. I had bought a boat. Guess who I bought a boat from? an FBI agent. Okay, and I knew who she happened to be of Iranian American background. Somehow that got translated to the Shah of Iran's daughter bought me a boat.
I can see how that
And
goes.
and they investigated. So I make a very this happened to me. The reason I talk about this is because this is what happens. So somebody has went to Ted Cruz and said, hey, they had this guy that sat down. He saw the president sending the email. And Ted Cruz is taking that, quote, whistleblower, quote, fact, just like the Shah's daughter, and now he's trying to make it a case. It's going to go nowhere. And if they try to do this, this will be the biggest blow-up since Jim Jordan's Federalization Committee, you know?
It's weaponization.
Yeah.
I'm still waiting for the smoking gun. But here's the thing, and this is what blows my mind, is what we've done is we've taken right-wing talk radio, and Fox put it on TV, and it kind of sold, and now we've taken that shock jock kind of shock radio, grievance radio, and we've thrown it in Congress. We've got senators now wanting to be the Limbaughs of the world, and that's not what they're there to do.
Right. And so what they're doing, they want the FBI. This is what Grassley wants the FBI to produce this alleged recording of the whole scheme of Biden. So what we're trying to say here, and this would be remarkable if this actually, were true, but I think Grassley's doing the right thing to say, well, give me, okay, if this tape's out there, okay, where is it? They're trying to say, they've got the president on recording. And that's the rumor mill that's, around the hill, if you ask anybody. And it's just not going to happen. But Cruz is stating it as, as fact. He should be basically impeached over this. Grassley's been around long enough, Republican in the Senate. He's been around long enough to say, we're starting impeachment. He's been around long enough to not do that.
Yeah. Last question I've got. Evidently some tape. We're back to tapes. Evidently, there's some maybe possibly missing tapes from Trump, the Mar-a-Lago years, or any thoughts on the missing tapes?
Well, I read an article where somebody had packed up something for President Biden, and then Trump's saying that somebody packed up some stuff for him. So you've got who packed what into the boxes. Now, the tapes, of course, because of the famous missing 15 minutes, doesn't sit well, let's say, for, a Republican. So I basically, I think these aren't they like log tapes?
Yeah. They just said, there's some doctored tapes potentially. And I'm going, quite interesting. We'll see. Here we go again.
Yeah. And who knows? I don't know that we're ever going to get down to the whole bottom of the classified documents. Probably how this ends is that Congress will step in. Let's hope they don't do an investigatory committee, and we waste enough taxpayers' monies on those things. They'll probably step in and say, "Here's now how you do records," and say, we're going to clean this all up. But as far as the missing tapes and logs, Trump will always be able to say, "Hey, they weren't my deal. I didn't do that. He handled it, not me."
No, you're right, and this is where I'm kind of angry, and not surprised that we haven't already fixed the system. Look, you go, okay, everyone's got all this classified information. How about we fix it? How about we do something? There's a body in this country, and I'm trying to remember. They make laws. And they fix problems, not create them. They fix them. They're at least there used to be. There used to be a bunch of people that we had be our representatives, and those representatives fixed problems. Maybe we could find out who that is again.
Well, right, and let's look back at one thing here when we talk about the gaps. There was a House committee. I'm trying to remember. This has been well over a year ago. I don't even know what happened to it. And, I do news. But there was a House committee, and there was, during January the 6th, there were 7 hours of unexplained gaps. Now, how do you have a system in the White House that shuts off by itself You know,
It was done by they have bad Wi-Fi. That's the reason.
But whatever happened to that whole thing? You don't hear a word now. But what happened to the committee looking into it?
Yeah,
where are the missing hours?
That is a good question, and one we'll have to pick up on. But Bob, as always, I appreciate the time. Great stuff.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you.
Our good friend Bob Ney. Yeah, that's a good question. Where'd all that stuff go? Quick break. Right back to wrap things up. Stick around. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1852. It was the last day of a 3-day convention held in Cincinnati, Ohio. Printers who worked for newspapers and other publications from 14 cities had converged to decide if they wanted to form a union. The printers had first met on the question of starting a union 2 years before in New York City. Now they were ready, and with a vote, the National Typographical Union was born. The very first action of the new union was to denounce Sunday workdays. Only one person cast his vote against the motion. The printers would play a leadership role in the U.S. labor movement. Printers were located in major cities across the U.S. Even more importantly, the union's members often worked for newspapers and had a skill set that could help get the word out about union news and actions. 17 years later, the organization changed its name to the International Typographical Union in recognition of new Canadian locals that joined. That same year, the union decided to let women into its ranks. This made it one of the earliest unions to do so. In 1870, Augusta Lewis was elected as corresponding secretary. She became the first female officer of a nationwide union. The ITU was known to be a very democratic union with strong locals. As printing technology changed, the union faced many challenges. Computers dramatically transformed the work of printing. These technology changes reduced the numbers and strength of the union. In 1986, the ITU merged with the Communication Workers of America. One of the ITU's most famous members was author Mark Twain, who joined the Typographical Union as a young man and proudly held his union card for the rest of his life. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. So I want to wrap today up with, I think, my favorite story of the day. I think the favorite news story that I came across was evidently Fox is upset that Media Matters is using video footage that they obtained from whistleblower, leaker, whatever. And their lawyers have sent a cease and desist letter saying, we demand you cease and desist from distribution, publication, and misuse of Fox's misappropriated proprietary footage, which you are now on notice was unlawfully obtained. Because look, they've got all of this footage of Tucker Carlson, being crude and offensive and, whatever, making comments that don't make him look professional. There are things that you probably shouldn't have said that, he thinks. So they've been putting this stuff out, and Fox is upset about it. Now, what I find interesting, as Angelo Caruso points out, the president of Media Matters, he says that reporting on newsworthy leaked material is the cornerstone of journalism. And he said for Fox to argue otherwise is absurd and further dispels any pretense that they are a news operation. And I'm telling you, I think they want to get sued by Fox. I think they want to get on that lawsuit so that they can countersue them and maybe make a little bit of money. But anyway, if you missed any of today's program, make sure you grab the podcast. Wherever you find your favorite podcast, you'll find ours. You got questions, comments, thoughts, something I said got under your skin, I want to hear it. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.